tens of millions of families with Alzheimer's disease and dementia all over the world, including our family. We are Alls in the Fam. I'm Alan Fair.
And I'm Polly Fair Noyes. We're siblings, we are parents, but we're also caregivers.
This is our podcast. This is our support group. Welcome to our family. Alzheimer's sucks, but this family lives, laughs, and learns as we fight for a cure. Welcome. Hey, Bonnie. Hey, Tracy.
Hey, Alan.
Hi, Alan.
So welcome to Alls in the Fam. Polly bought a car today, and the car buying ran long, so she wasn't able to make it, which is too bad for her, because in this episode we had a really wonderful guest, Del Potter, PhD from UC Berkeley, who specializes in psychedelic research on all sorts of ailments, including depression, PTSD, and of course, in our case, Alzheimer's. It was a really interesting interview, wasn't it?
It's fascinating, and there's so much more happening in that science field than I ever imagined, even when you sent us the original research, Alan. It's so promising and interesting.
I agree. Just the idea that a brain with Alzheimer's might have some neuroplasticity left in it is really, really good to hear.
Yeah, really great stuff. We're here with Del Potter, and Del has a PhD in medical anthropology from UC Berkeley, and then specializing in ethnopsychopharmacology. And I practiced pronouncing that, by the way. The chemistry and extraction of psychoactive indigenous plants and the cultural significance. So, Del, can you explain in layperson's terms what all that means?
It's best told through my personal story, which is I started out doing research. I came out of psychology into anthropology, and I was interested in doing psychological research into the personality development of shamanic practitioners, and just trying to look at what the commonalities were in their psychohistory cross-culturally, to see if there was anything that really distinguished the personality development of those kinds of individuals who have apparently the proclivity and intuition to be able to do indigenous healing. As time went on, I became much more and more interested in the ethnobotany of what they were collecting, putting together in their shamanic formulations. And it gradually became much more of a focus for me. And as time went on, I really began to become interested in the phytochemistry of these botanicals, what they offered in terms of healing, and began to collect a database of botanicals, formulations, the interaction of botanicals, and through time, I began to see that these compounds and these formulations may have tremendous benefit for Western pharmaceutical science.
And when was this?
This was way back when. This was, in the late 70s, early 80s. I did most of my postgraduate work in the 80s.
Yeah, so certainly before the current renaissance that seems to be happening right now with regard to research using psychedelics, which you're certainly part of this community. Want to hear what you're discovering that might offer hope to those of us worried about being predisposed to Alzheimer's and dementia.
Well, for a long time, this kind of research really fell out of favor. It was very difficult to get funding, largely because, as as sort of widely known at this point, it was sort of used as a way of politically targeting either minority communities or a way to disenfranchise communities that were using psychedelic compounds recreationally at that time. So the research kind of fell out of favor. I had trouble being able to get funding for a lot of the work that I was doing. But this psychedelic renaissance, what's happening now is people are more or less rediscovering the potential of these compounds for both neuropharmacology, all aspects, mental health issues that include Alzheimer's. And I think, the main thing, one of the first things you want to talk about is what distinguishes a psychedelic compound. And what distinguishes them is activity at a particular brain receptor. We have a number of different receptor complexes in our brain and throughout our body. One of which is, they're usually described in terms of numbers and letters that describe these complexes. And what distinguishes psychedelic compounds is activity at the 5-HT2A receptor. This receptor has a really significant role in both cognition and in our inflammatory response. And it is through that binding, that effect, that these compounds, almost like a key in a lock, gravitate to these receptor sites, that we begin to see some benefit or potential benefit for Alzheimer's. The 5-HT2A receptor is known again for not only mediating aspects of cognition and learning, but also our response to inflammation. And as we have come to understand, inflammation is a significant part of the pathology of Alzheimer's.
So I'm going to try and break it down in a real simplified way, and you correct me here. Something like the active ingredient in psychedelic mushrooms, psilocybin, is shown to be an anti-inflammatory that can help reduce the type of inflammation that is known to be one of the causes of Alzheimer's?
Well, we know, that's what sort of points us in the direction of psychedelics. As it turns out, their pharmacology and mechanism of action has an effect on a number of targets associated with Alzheimer's. So we know that, one of the targets, one of the problems or in the pathology of Alzheimer's is this amyloid protein that accumulates, causing intertubular damage, causing axonal damage, and gradually, over time, cell death. So what's interesting is that besides activity at the 5-HT2A receptor, psychedelics have a broad effect in other areas. And these are really sort of generally referred to in research as neuroplasticity. That neuroplasticity has two forms, one of which is the growth of dendrite cells, and the other is production of, well, let's say there's two aspects. One is the intercellular aspect, and one is the connectivity aspect, both of which are elements of Alzheimer's. So at the cellular pharmacology level, we see an actual increase in growth of dendritic cells in areas that, in fact, are areas that are kind of essential to learning and cognition, like the hippocampus, which turns out to be one of the main areas of decline in Alzheimer's. So the way this is expressed is we actually see increased nerve cell growth in these areas. And people may not understand that brains have some limited ability to create new nerve cells, not a tremendous ability, but some ability to create new nerve cells. So we see this increased production of dendritic growth throughout areas that are really targeted by Alzheimer's, like the hippocampus. And besides that, we see an increase in this signaling factor that also increases and improves synaptic transmission. It's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So that's on the cellular side and the synaptic side. But then we also see an interesting increase in a kind of connectivity in the brain. Normally, we have the neocortex is kind of running the way the brain operates. Under the effects of psychedelics and on, post psychedelic experience, we see an increase of different parts of the brain speaking to one another in an illuminated way that didn't take place previously. So all of this portends potential for treatment using psychedelics for Alzheimer's.
Wow. Certainly, I'm reading a lot about some of the well-known psychedelic research that's going on, such as at Johns Hopkins, and working with terminally ill cancer patients. You hear a lot for depression, PTSD. You don't hear quite as much as Alzheimer's, and I'm wondering, are we close to a psychedelic therapy? Being in a clinical study that could actually lead to FDA approval? How many years, decades do you think we're away from really having hope in the larger marketplace?
Well, I would say hope is emerging. And very recently, about last year in 2020, one of the first reviews of the effects of psychedelic compounds on Alzheimer's was released by a couple of researchers from England who did a sort of mini review of all of the research, both on microdosing and the neurobiological effects of psychedelics. And it became one of the most popular articles from that journal, having thousands of people taking a look at it. So this really there is a real developing interest in this area. The company Eleusis has also started a process of looking at using LSD for treatment of Alzheimer's, and Johns Hopkins is now taking clinical volunteers for a clinical study using psilocybin for the treatment of Alzheimer's. So we're getting close to having some real clinical research on Alzheimer's that sort of directly targets it.
Wow. Who's the right type of profile for the Johns Hopkins case study? Do you know? Asking for a friend.
They say that, it is healthy older volunteers, and they are not excluding people with mild cognitive impairment. So it's going to be sort of a broad range from sort of healthy older people to people with mild cognitive impairment, whether it's Alzheimer's or other types of dementia.
Very
okay.
Very
well,
exciting.
Alan, I'm sure you were thinking, like I was thinking, we're kind of close to Johns Hopkins, at least Bonnie and I are, and our other sister, and our mother with Alzheimer's is as well. So we were thinking, wow, could we possibly get our mother into a study like that? But she is 84 and in the mid-range of Alzheimer's. So it sounds like she would not be a good candidate. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know exactly what the parameters are, but, perhaps I can, put in the chat or something like that, a link to where you actually request an application to be a participant in the study. As far as I know, they're collecting a broad range of volunteers for it, and it's going to be an extensive study. Furthermore, Eleusis is planning a phase 2 clinical study coming up here, where they will also be looking at microdosing of LSD and using that for treatment of Alzheimer's. So a lot of this is encouraging because we've come to understand that some of these effects can be achieved without what is usually considered a large dose of LSD or psilocybin, but in fact are smaller doses that are subperceptual, below the range of perception. So that's going to really be what constitutes the Eleusis study.
That was my next question, is in part of its overall effect, does it require having the psychoactive symptoms or experience? Can one derive the benefit without having to have a psychedelic trip associated with it?
Well, The results are a bit mixed, but on balance, they're positive. What we're seeing is, a lot of indications that low doses not only don't impair cognition, even acutely, but that they also begin to have a long-term effect of improved cognition. Now, a lot of this comes from self-reported studies, which are problematic because there's usually not a placebo arm to the study. But those studies are starting to emerge that indicate, based upon a great deal of work on a broad range of subjects, that microdosing does enhance memory, cognition, creativity, and other cognitive aspects.
Really interesting.
That was fascinating. I that was one of my questions, was what Alan just asked, especially if you're going with patients that have mild cognition or mid-range cognition issues, because they wouldn't necessarily, if you use our mother for an example, be able to understand what was happening, even if you told them over and over again, if they were having that kind of an effect during the treatment process. So I could see it being limited to healthier patients or patients with very mild cognition issues, just to be able to report at all, or to be able to withstand the types of activity that was happening during treatment.
Yeah, this is super hopeful because, if we can accomplish the kind of neuroplasticity represented by some studies with a subperceptual dose, then, we can avoid some of the more adverse effects of psilocybin or LSD, having to do with changes in sensory experience and what might be referred to as hallucinations.
And something that I'm thinking about as I listen to this, knowing your background in studying shamanistic cultures and other things, and obviously those cultures and ceremonies continue to this day, are they experiencing the same spike in mental health issues in Alzheimer's and dementia as we are in Western culture? Or is that tradition and sense of ceremony and how they use these drugs keeping some of our Western issues at bay and within their own communities?
Well, in general, I would say, just from my experience, yes, but that's more a sort of a subjective, personal anecdote. We don't have any real studies of Alzheimer's in indigenous people and psychedelics, but in my experience, we tend to see less types of dementia and Alzheimer's related issues among indigenous people. Now, whether that is a result of their diet or physical activity or the opportunity to use psychedelic drugs for treatment, nobody's really sure. But we tend to see less of it in indigenous groups.
Wow. So you're calling in from Oakland. Tell us about the culture that's going on out there right now. It's one of the few cities where psilocybin has been decriminalized, not legalized, but are you seeing, is there anything happening in the local community there that's further proof or examples of the hope that might be for all?
Well, I mean, we're at a very early stage here, but I'm a great believer in the democratization of the use of these compounds, just for issues of cognitive liberty, as well as, they have a long history of safe use. And I believed if, rolled out and administered properly, that we'll see very few issues regarding safety. But what we are seeing is Decriminalized Nature, who's been the organization that is most active in Oakland, has been, really working with the city council to create not only decriminalization, which should be differentiated from legalization.
Right.
So there isn't really a commercial industry. What we're just saying is, I think what Oakland is just saying is that we're going to withdraw making this an enforcement priority. So as a result, there's no commercialization, but we're allowing people to use them. So one of the key things I think that is also beneficial is they're allowing for what they're describing, and this is one of the things that decriminalized nature pushed for, is ceremonial, what they describe as ceremonial or group use, where there can be group sessions that are conducted and allowing, you know, a number of people to participate. Those types of events are being sort of condoned and put within a legal framework, which makes it, you know, basically decriminalized.
Suddenly, that back garden of yours has a lot more appeal, and you know, we're getting our vaccine soon. Be happy to accept any invitations.
Yeah. Absolutely, at any point. You know, I've been told, you know, that there is sort of an opportunity to freely exchange compounds in Oakland. It's very unsupervised, and as a result, so far there have been no problems at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. It's interesting because these medicines are sacred in many non-Western cultures, and this dates back thousands of years. What's the level of concern about big pharma getting this and, you know, changing it enough to get a patent, and, you know, changing some of these, you know, like take this pill and everything's better, versus, you know, these ritualistic aspects that brought in community and other aspects to the healing?
Well, there certainly can be excesses on the commercialization pharmaceutical side. Recently, we saw the passage of Measure 109 in Oregon, which allows for the distribution. Well, what it allows for is the creation of an advisory commission, which will create a legal framework that will sort of specify the rules that will allow distribution through clinical venues of these compounds. What's disturbing is, in parallel, we see a company really kind of, you know, typified by Compass Pathways, where they are trying to patent just about everything to do with the clinical experience of psychedelic compounds. So we see them attempting to patent mood lighting, soft furniture, subdued colors, a really good sound system. And this is after they tried to patent psilocybin synthesis in such a way that would occupy the field and prevent, you know, nonprofit drug development companies like Usona and B-More, these other nonprofit entities, from producing this medicine inexpensively. Their idea is that the only way that these compounds can be distributed safely is through a pharmaceutical paradigm. Well, all of this is a bit disturbing, but it became even more disturbing when the CEO and co-founder of Compass, George Goldsmith, started reaching out to psychedelic researchers at the Oregon Health and Science University, really in an attempt to kind of drum up concern and mobilize opposition to implementing 109 in Oregon. And, you know, Compass is unequivocal about their opposition to this measure and their intent to keep psilocybin therapy within the FDA medical pharma frame only. I think this is a really disturbing trend. I think what's taking place in Oregon presents a really great opportunity, because we're saying, you know, Oregon's saying essentially, we're going to distribute these compounds not the way we do cannabis. You're not going to go to a dispensary and just buy them and use them yourself in an unsupervised fashion, but you're going to really take them in the context of psychotherapy and in a clinical setting. But it's going to be available to all adults not simply those who have medical indications like treatment-resistant depression, and can be used for things like cognitive enhancement, or possibly as a regime that protects you and protects your brain from Alzheimer's. So this broader approach I find to be, a better one and more conducive to the sort of the development of the industry and development of different approaches that will, I find the pharmaceutical approach, even though, I work at a pharmaceutical company, overly restrictive.
Yeah, so we're sort of seeing the battle play out that might end up with it being fully big pharma. You have to get a prescription under these very strict settings and guidelines, or the same way we might get a tincture from an herbalist or go to the vitamin store. It could be something that could be potentially something we take like a vitamin in our future as a preventative measure.
You would still take it in a supervised session, and you would be well supervised, but it wouldn't go through a pharmaceutical process. In fact, the Oregon model sort of leapfrogs over the FDA in the sense that these compounds, even though they are Schedule I compounds, will be distributed. But they place them very securely in this clinical delivery model where, you're not going to be just taking them and getting behind the wheel of a car. You're going to be have the opportunity to be in a really nice, relaxed setting with someone who's going to help you. And we find this to be one of the most important parts of the experience, is the post-experience integration that takes place. Because it's one thing to have and experience these tremendous insights that these compounds can provide. It's a whole other thing to be able to integrate it into a plan or a program that will allow you to sustain the effects and have them last for a long time.
Yeah, that would be my fear almost. If you did it through big pharma and got a prescription, that you could potentially be lacking that back end piece, in addition to restricting it from so many people who might benefit and not be able to access a prescription. So, I mean, I think what you're talking about, giving it in a broader audience, but still having it be controlled in terms of delivery of the actual medicine, as opposed to just delivery of the prescription, and then you can go pick it up and take it whenever you want. It seems like it's clear that you need to be able to do both. Yeah.
Absolutely. So. I would agree myself. There's also another aspect to this, and that is that big pharma is very interested in producing a compound with less adverse side effects, and I think we all are. But to what extent will they remove the aspect that really provides the very profound change that these compounds actually can provide? So there's kind of two schools of thought on this. One school of thought believes that it's just the neuropharmacology, the neuroplasticity that these compounds provide. And then there's another school of thought that really suggests it's the profound mystical experience that these compounds provide that really become the source of change and development.
Yeah, you can't cherry pick the aspects of it. You need the psychoactive experience in order to show the full benefit of prevention, or dare I say it, even a cure. Do you ever see, I'm sure there's a whole host of moral and ethical issues to do studies on people who already have Alzheimer's, but could it within a brain that already has Alzheimer's, could these drugs still have benefit at that phase?
Well, I think the research on microdosing that's coming forward may point a way to being able to administer these compounds at a subperceptual level without having people actually experience the full-blown experience, but still be able to take advantage the neuroplasticity component that these compounds provide. So there are increasing indications, and there's a lot of interest in this path forward.
Wow.
Do you have any anecdotes on that subject? I know the clinical studies haven't been completed, but I'm just curious as to whether you've heard any stories about somebody with Alzheimer's undergoing treatment and coming out of it and being changed.
I don't have any particular anecdotes, but I will say this, that the state that psychedelic compounds put your brain in is the functional connectivity between different regions of the brain. That's more like the way a child's brain is experiencing life, without the rigid framework of perception that we acquire as adults. This is more like, when we're very open to experiences. So normally in the adult brain, as I said, most of brain activity is sort of directed by the neocortex and the prefrontal cortex. What we see is under the psychedelic experience, and this effect persists after the experience for up to, some people say weeks, and there are indications that it continues to stay in place up to months afterwards, that this increased communication between different parts of the brain that normally don't talk to each other is very reminiscent of the way the brain communicates when we're children. So, it may in fact be beneficial for us to be able to return to some extent to a more flexible, childlike way of apprehending the world.
I love that. Getting back to a state of play. That sounds really great to me. Well, where can we go to educate ourselves even further when it comes to this path of research for Alzheimer's? Where should our antennas be, and what should we be paying attention to?
I would say, first of all, every person who's very interested in this should read this article that came out in Frontiers in Synaptic Neuroscience. The title of the article is Psychedelics as a Treatment for Alzheimer's Disease Dementia. The authors are Simon Andrew Van Jones and Alison O'Kelly. They come out of UK-based Cornwall Partnership NHS Foundation Trust.
Great. We'll put this link in the show notes as well.
Yeah, both of them are researchers in geriatric psychiatry and are specialists in Alzheimer's research. This is a great introduction to how psychedelics may help Alzheimer's. Another thing that might be of interest is an interview that took place with, I believe it's Albert Rameau, who is doing the research at Johns Hopkins, the new study that's going to be taking place on Alzheimer's coming up, and the one that will have the broad clinical population that will include people with cognitive impairment. This interview, and I'll provide the link to it, is very instructive as well.
It's great. Thank you. Well, Del, when you look at the freight train that we're on with mental health, Alzheimer's, and dementia, 50 million, a number that continues to increase. It's really exciting to sit with someone that's on the frontier of something that holds the promise of something that could really deliver hope to so many millions of people. So really appreciate you taking the time to be on Alz and the Fam with us, and we'll have to come out and visit.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I invite you guys to come out and visit me at my lab where I'm doing some work. I'd love to show you around and talk about some more of the work that we're doing.
I would like
Thank
that.
you, Del.
Yeah. That was amazing. Thank you so much. This was fantastic. So much more information than we knew was out there, and so exciting to hear what you're doing. And we really appreciate the research that you did to tell us about other things that are going on. So it's really appreciate that.
Well, just briefly, I'll tell you that at IO Biosciences, where I'm Chief Science Officer, our approach is kind of a traditional pharma approach. We're looking at, some of these compounds that are out there like LSD and psilocybin, and we're looking at, from a traditional pharma perspective, how can we make the next generation of compounds which are more targeted for efficacy, which are having an even better safety profile and have even less adverse side effects. So to that end, we're about to begin preclinical work on a psychedelic compound that has a better safety profile than psilocybin and does, in fact, reduce one of the major adverse side effects, the challenging experience. A lot of people, at the onset of the effects of these compounds experience fear or panic or anxiety as a result of the changes in perception and really the changes in more the way we define ourselves suddenly becomes very permeable under these experiences, and that can be disconcerting. The compound we're working on, we hope will provide a much more euphoric, less dysphoric type of experience and reduce some of the challenging experiences that people have.
Well, and that was actually going to be my question about if you're using these with someone with dementia and they started to have those fear reactions in a psychedelic experience, how you would be able to, it would just be, I couldn't wrap my arms around how that would come back because they don't know from minute to minute what's causing it and where they are and what's happening. So if you have a compound that reduces that adverse side effect, it would really make it so much more usable in that population.
Well, that's absolutely the case. What we look for, we're trying to target a number of aspects of the experience. One is the duration.
That was the other thing that I had in there exactly, is the duration. Yeah.
6 to 10 hours. We hope our compound will provide an experience that's more in the 3 to 4 hour range. One, we use less clinical resources. Someone doesn't have to attend to you for that length of time. And the other is it becomes more accessible to riskier clinical populations. Usually we avoid, giving psychedelic compounds to either borderline personality or schizophrenics. And as you would say, it would be extremely disconcerting for an old person who was necessarily beginning the minor stages of either dementia or Alzheimer's. So by limiting the length of the experience, reducing the challenging aspect, we hope to make it more available to riskier populations.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think those are two really critical areas.
Del Potter, thank you so much for being on. Great to see you, man. Thanks for listening to All's in the Fam. In the fight against Alzheimer's and dementia, we are all family. Find us at All's in the Fam on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and on our website, allsinthefampodcast.com. We appreciate you clicking that subscribe button on Apple, Google, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast catcher may be. Alzheimer's sucks, but we are in it together. We are All's in the Family. Talk soon.